Alright, so I'm Lily Hooper, and this is my video recording for Achievement 5 of the CareerFoundry course, and this is part 2 of that. So I'll quickly just read through the question and then give my answer and move on from there. So question number 1, what does the CRISP-DM methodology for data mining entail? What does the data analyst do in each step? So this methodology, it is a proven and validated approach to data mining, and it actually has 6 steps to it. So those 6 steps include business understanding, data preparation, modeling, evaluation, and deployment is that last step. And I'll briefly go through what each of those steps entail. So the first one, business understanding, it really just entails that you need to make sure that your goals for the project align with the business goals. So really just understanding those business goals. The second step, data understanding. In this step, you're going to gather your data. You're going to find any inconsistencies or any quality issues within your data. It's important in this step that you note down these issues, and that'll be important throughout the rest of the process as well. So that third step is data prep. In this step, you're going to clean your data. You're going to resolve those quality issues that you found in the previous step. Fourth step, modeling. This step's important because in this step, you're going to pick the model that aligns with your goals, and you're going to design a test plan for this model. And then once that other analyst helps you test that plan, you're then going to design a prototype model here. The next step, evaluation. During this step, you're going to evaluate that prototype model. You're going to get feedback from your other analysts on your team, or potentially board members, depending on what type of project this is. And then at the end of this step, you're going to create that presentation for the model to whoever your stakeholders are. The last step, as discussed earlier, is deployment. Essentially what this means is that you're just deploying that model if in fact after the presentation it's decided that this is the model that you want to go with. So the second question, explain what needs to be done before you can forecast time series. In other words, what does time series analysis involve? So before you can forecast a time series, you want to make sure that you have the correct data. In that way, what I really mean is that your data needs to be stationary. So if you have non-stationary data, you might want to convert your data to stationary, because stationary data will have much more accurate forecasting than non-stationary data. Discuss the main principles of data ethics, as well as what companies or organizations could do to uphold these principles. So data ethics, obviously with the rise of big data, has been a big discussion, especially in the news, and you see a lot of times companies that have made some mistakes in regards to data ethics. So one of the main principles around data ethics is really transparency, and it's transparency in a lot of different ways, one of which needs to be your sampling and your data collection. Need to be transparent about how you're sampling and how you're collecting that data. You need to be transparent about how you're testing that data. And then you also need to be transparent about how you're processing your data. So organizations, one way that they can help with the data ethics is really being transparent in regards to all of those processes around data. Another way that companies can be a little more proactive in regards to their data ethics is by training employees. There's a lot of opportunity for employees having a big impact within the data ethics of an organization, and one way that they can help is by having a good training program about how to be ethical in regards to their data. And we'll move on to the next one. Imagine you're an analyst at a financial services company and you have some concerns about bias in the way a predictive model was measured. How would you raise your concerns with your manager? Make some suggestions for how to avoid measurement bias in the future. So I think just to answer that first part of the question, what would I do and how would I bring it up to my manager? Well, I would be certain that I would bring this up to my manager quickly. I think a lot of times what happens is employees don't bring it up until later, and at that point they're too far along in the process as far as the project goes. So I would definitely bring it up. I would set a meeting with my manager and bring up those concerns as early as I receive those concerns, in order to try to stop that continuation of ethical and bias issues. So just to answer that second part of the question, so measurement bias, one way to somewhat avoid measurement bias would be to measure with multiple devices. So that's going to help you not have that one issue. If one of the devices has some sort of bias in it, if you measure with multiple, it's going to mitigate some of that measurement bias. Another way is to communicate your testing procedures. So constantly I guess I should say the ability to communicate those testing procedures. So being able to tell others how you tested, how you measured, will help to ensure that there is limited bias there. And similar to the last question, another way would be to train employees on the project. Make sure that they're aware of the types of bias that could potentially arise in the project, and make sure that they have good training on how to spot it. Lastly, I'll just say that one way to avoid and mitigate this measurement bias is by the continuous evaluation of your process. If you are constantly looking for better ways, less biased ways to do things, then that's going to help you try to mitigate that bias in the long run. So last question here, explain the difference between regression and classification models in predictive analysis. When would you use one of these models over the other? So that regression model in predictive analysis, it is mainly for quantitative variables. When you're trying to find a relationship between those variables, how does one affect the other? That would be the best time to use that regression model in predictive analysis. Classification model in predictive analysis would be better used when you're trying to predict what category an entity would fall into based on some predetermined factors. So one example of this would be, that I remember from the reading, is your email inbox. So this is a good example of whether it goes to spam or it doesn't go to spam. That's a good way to show an example of that classification model. So anytime you're trying to classify something based on more of a categorical method, classification would be best. But if you're trying to find a relationship between those two entities, you're going to want to go with the regression model in predictive analysis.